Good afternoon. No, wait, hold on. Good afternoon. Good, good, good. Ugh. Hold on, I need to restart this. Verizon. Thank you, YouTube. Alright, let's start this.
The Parable of the Dagger, adapted from Raymond Smullyan. 1. Once upon a time, there was a court jester who dabbled in logic. The jester presented the king with 2 boxes. Upon the first box was inscribed, "Either this box contains an angry frog, or the box with the false inscription contains an angry frog, but not both." On the second box was inscribed, "Either this box contains gold and the box with the false inscription contains an angry frog, or this box contains an angry frog and the box with the true inscription contains gold." And the jester said to the king, "One box contains an angry frog, the other box gold, and one, and only one, of the inscriptions is true." The king opened the wrong box and was savaged by an angry frog. "You see," the jester said, "let us hypothesize that the first inscription is the true one. Then suppose the first box contains gold. Then the other box would have an angry frog, while the box with a true inscription would contain gold, which would make the second statement true as well. Now hypothesize that the first inscription is false, and that the first box contains gold.
Where?
Then the second inscription would be..." The king ordered the jester thrown in the dungeons. A day later, the jester was brought before the king in chains and shown 2 boxes. "One box contains a key," said the king, "to unlock your chains, and if you find the key you are free. But the other box contains a dagger for your heart if you fail." And the first box was inscribed, "Either both inscriptions are true, or both inscriptions are false." And the second box was inscribed, "This box contains the key." The jester reasoned thusly, "Suppose the first inscription is true, then the second inscription must also be true. Now suppose the first inscription is false, then again the second inscription must be true. So the second box must contain the key if the first inscription is true, and also if the first inscription is false. Therefore, the second box must logically contain the key." The jester opened the second box and found the dagger. "How?" cried the jester in horror as he was dragged away. "It's logically impossible." "It is entirely possible," replied the king. "I merely wrote those inscriptions on 2 boxes, and then I put the dagger in the second one. Make no mistake that humans will never accept my death until they see proof that you are no longer alive either," Gerard said as he removed his clothes upon waking up from his frigid cold bedroom on his answering machine. A stark, dark room with a single globe for light illuminating his body sprawled over on a white sheet hammock-like device adorned with handmade foreign, nautical symbol seal boat bilge pumps traced and sounded on it from centuries past, woven into it and finished off by silk for covering it on top of it, for covering up his upper half while lying down nude on it, pretending to be horizontal so he can slowly show himself off, wearing nothing but a bra without straps out of love to push flamingos into bed sheets. He is creating gallows humor with his exposed body language, physical twitches like maybe wake up Milva so she can to enjoy her golden anniversary intimate outing on this glorious day by herself, while alone on her birthday. Because sex symbol Gerard Delacroix turned 71 actually 10 months in advance, PSD late Oct 2018. The Parable of Hemlock. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Standard medieval syllogism. Socrates raised the glass of hemlock to his lips. Do you suppose, asked one of the onlookers, that even hemlock will not be enough to kill so wise and good a man? No, replied another bystander, a student of philosophy. All men are mortal, and Socrates is a man, and if a mortal drinks hemlock, surely he dies. Well, said the onlooker, what if it happens that Socrates is immortal? Nonsense, replied the student, a little sharply. All men are mortal by definition. It is part of what we mean by the word man. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore Socrates is mortal. It is not merely a guess, but a logical certainty. I suppose that's right, said the onlooker. Oh, look. Socrates already drank the hemlock while we were talking. Yes, he should be keeling over any minute now, said the student. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited. Socrates appears not to be mortal, said the onlooker. Then Socrates must not be a man, replied the student. All men are mortal. Socrates is not mortal. Therefore Socrates is not a man. And that is not merely a guess, but a logical certainty. The fundamental problem with arguing that things are true by definition is that you can't make reality go a different way by choosing a different definition. You could reason, perhaps, as follows. All things I have observed which wear clothing, speak language, and use tools have also shed certain other properties as well, such as breathing air and pumping red blood. The last 30 humans belonging to this cluster whom I observed to drink hemlock soon fell over and stopped moving. Socrates wears a toga, speaks fluent ancient Greek, and drank hemlock from a cup. So I predict that Socrates will keel over in the next 5 minutes. But that would be mere guessing. It wouldn't be, absolutely and eternally certain. The Greek philosophers, like most pre-scientific philosophers, were rather fond of certainty. Luckily, the Greek philosophers have a crushing rejoinder to your questioning. You have misunderstood the meaning of all humans are mortal, they say. It is not a mere observation. It is part of the definition of the word human. Mortality is one of several properties that are individually necessary and together sufficient to determine membership in the class human. The statement, all humans are mortal, is a logically valid truth, absolutely unquestionable. And if Socrates is human, he must be mortal. which is a logical deduction, as certain can be. But then, we can never know for certain that Socrates is a human until after Socrates has been observed to be mortal. It does no good to observe that Socrates speaks fluent Greek, or that Socrates has red blood, or even that Socrates has human DNA. None of these characteristics are logically equivalent to mortality. You have to see him die before you can conclude that he was human. And even then, it's not infinitely certain. What if Socrates rises from the grave a night after you see him die? Or more realistically, what if Socrates is signed up for cryonics? If mortality is defined to mean finite lifespan, then you can never really know if someone was human until you've observed to the end of eternity, just to make sure they don't come back. Or you could think you saw Socrates keel over, but it could be an illusion projected onto your eyes with a retinal scanner. Or maybe you just hallucinated the whole thing. The problem with syllogisms is that they're always valid. All humans are mortal. Socrates is human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Is, if you treat it as a logical syllogism, logically valid within our own universe. It's also logically valid within neighboring Everett branches, in which, due to a slightly different evolved biochemistry, hemlock is a delicious treat rather than a poison. And it's logically valid even in universes where Socrates never existed, or for that matter, where humans never existed. The Bayesian definition of evidence favoring a hypothesis is evidence which we are more likely to see if the hypothesis is true than if it is false. Observing that a syllogism is logically valid can never be evidence favoring any empirical proposition, because the syllogism will be logically valid whether the proposition is true or false. Syllogisms are valid in all possible worlds, and therefore, observing their validity never tells us anything about which possible world we actually live in. This doesn't mean that logic is useless, just that logic can only tell us that which, in some sense, we already know, but we do not always believe what we know. Is the number 29, 384, 209 prime, by virtue of how I define my decimal system and my axioms of arithmetic. I have already determined my answer to this question, but I do not know what my answer is yet, and I must do some logic to find out. Similarly, if I form the uncertain empirical generalization, humans are vulnerable to hemlock, and the uncertain empirical guess, Socrates is human. Logic can tell me that my previous guesses are predicting that Socrates will be vulnerable to hemlock. It's been suggested that we can view logical reasoning as resolving our uncertainty about impossible possible worlds. Eliminating probability, mass, and logically impossible worlds which we do not know to be logically impossible. In this sense, logical argument can be treated as observation. But when you talk about an empirical prediction like Socrates is going to keel over and stop breathing, or Socrates is going to do 50 jumping jacks and then compete in the Olympics next year, that is a matter of possible worlds, not impossible possible worlds. Logic can tell us which hypotheses match up to which observations, and it can tell us what these hypotheses predict for the future. It can bring old observations and previous guesses to bear on a new problem. But logic never flatly says, Socrates will stop breathing now, Logic never dictates any empirical question. It never settles any real-world query which could, by any stretch of the imagination, go either way. Just remember the litany against logic. Logic stays true wherever you may go. So logic never tells you where you live. Intellect will provide you numerous unfortunate tears. When intellect is very wise, intellect isn't infallible, is an obvious truism, and therefore could be shown by the mere gaining of intelligence on its own merits rather than from a third-party demonstration, including the best available evidence generalizing from such demonstration about truth and false properties meta levels above any specific evidentiary instance, or even facts about the relevant semantic meanings capable of passing between minds precisely corresponding. Finding knowledge when one is ignorant is a tough slog using pure observation techniques. Ancestor discoveries by coin tosses would in abrogate turn into real knowledge somewhere down the line if one only went far enough in the practical common sense expectation maximizing knowledge love, a philosophically justified methodology approach, until eventually an expert comes along with efficient lateral interactions which increase mutual technical exchange so much that everyone heads in the same direction with explicit results, quantitative quantified with repeatable testable protocols, sans conditions likely to produce subjective frequent errors, either accidental or slight, perpetrated on purpose every time someone off case runs into disparate unpredictable opposite ways, while the presumed fundamentals of all stages are either forcefully quashed or sidestepped as universal trivialities, leaving the problem insoluble due to one lapse on which bad luck will strike high, e.g. the final dice roll not producing a fluke relevant key insight that renders the approach negative impossible but automatic enough for inspection without any debilitating deviation from any axiomatic assumption. Sophistic gullible sods might spout forth potentially dangerous delusions nobody really fully shares, whose silly mental ramblings will allow for people without intellects to launch upon the streets with trained bandwidth authority replete with arrays of weapons possibly pointed inward instead of in their outward direction upon hearing your irrational pronouncement without due process reviewing how you arrived at your conclusion, thus lifting them above unfair forms of tyranny, extra-ordered or ushered through local authority fiat when needed, or preemptively crossing political lines where the state or self-government boundaries that should hardly be considered exclusive, defending fairyland at all costs even when it hurts, and finding what's really wise. Intellect isn't infallible. It's just effectively less biased than our own plebeian fallacies and prejudices disguised correctly as virtue intentions to look good by deriving synthetic results that illustrate the most flattering statistical average emotional grace denial ratio, which makes us appear like we know what's best when we don't, but at least we're taking steps towards betterment, doing what little we can throughout life as poor lambs. Stop delaying in illusionary and suffering delusions about illuminatus enlightenment when each follicle is no darker than a starling star. Otherwise, we'd be mindless, vulgar, parading Paulel in our fastest laid religion, smelly dialectic on the common simplicider, shouting Redbeard words as hidden inferences. Suppose I find a barrel, sealed at the top, but with a hole large enough for a hand. I reach in and feel a small, curved object. I pull the object out, and it's blue. A bluish egg. Next, I reach in and feel something hard and flat with edges, which, when I extract it, proves to be a red cube. I pull out 11 eggs and 8 cubes, and every egg is blue, and every cube is red. Now I reach in and I feel another egg-shaped object. Before I pull it out and look, I have to guess. What will it look like? The evidence doesn't prove that every egg in the barrel is blue and every cube is red. The evidence doesn't even argue this all that strongly. 19 is not a large sample size. Nonetheless, I'll guess that this egg-shaped object is blue, or as a runner-up guess, red. If I guess anything else, there's as many possibilities as distinguishable colors. And for that matter, who says the egg has to be a single shade? Maybe it has a picture of a horse painted on. It could even have 4 egg-sized objects crapping out of an elephant. Let me guess. My first reaction has ignored the most important detail. What am I looking at? What is it? It has 6 sides and is shaped like an egg, but it has 6 points of which some are slightly convex or concave. I don't know what these words mean, but they seem similar somehow. The most distinguishable feature is that it is flat at the top rather than round like a bread pan. To my eye, it appears to be blue, but there appears to be no defined edge around the sides, which makes this far from definitive. My everyday data doesn't allow me any ability to distinguish this pointy-edged object from any other egg-shaped object. Suppose someone took one of my eggs one step further here by sending me an animated GIF image of one of these blue eggs in the shape of a horse. Or rather, they send me an image with a single frame lined up perfectly with this object to make it look as realistic as possible. Then my eyes are tricked into seeing the image as close to reality as possible. But I have been so prearranged by my common sense data that all my assumptions have been packaged into this single frame and say something about these blue objects. They are horses. This horse is blue. What am I looking at? It is eyeballing me. That is what this damn GIF format appears to be doing. My natural problem-solving intuitions have evolved into data frames so specialized for interpreting beautiful still images that now they are not just superimposed onto whole hours of pixel extensions and intentions. What is red? Red is a color. What's a color? A color is a property of a thing. But what is a thing? And what's a property? Soon the two are lost in a maze of words defined in other words. A problem that Stephen Harnett once described as trying to learn Chinese from a Chinese/Chinese dictionary. Alternatively, if you ask me, what is red? I could point to a stop sign, then to someone wearing a red shirt and a traffic light that happens to be red, and blood from where I accidentally cut myself, and a red business card, and then I could call up a color wheel on my computer and move the cursor to the red area. This would probably be sufficient, though if you know what the word no means, the truly strict would insist that I point to the sky and say, no. One fix for that problem was Wernick's brilliant remark that mere nouns were good enough for everyone unless you were actually researching some problem critical to the efficient functioning of the biological world. Because just about every time humans encountered natural phenomena, there had already been somebody else who happened to be working on exactly that issue. It was then only a small jump legalistically or no jump legally at all. We do dream from concluding that trivial everyday things like color or name could be defined only as mere authorship. That is to say that they had no proper name until someone had written them into existence. Indeed, this didn't contain anything too forbidden for logical cosmopolitanism. With its essential commitment to AI, artificial composability theory, that all laws come in encodings implying all possible actions by any source they're all violating. none of these capacities of this other sentient entity. If this rather odd conclusion proved inconvenient because it caused political pushbacks against laws protecting property or other drippy aspects of Trumpian capitalism, rejoice. Faith is also the foundation stone because by defining all knowledge in terms of instrumentality, you effectively define all knowledge is preserved in human tools. All knowledge is entombed within human tools almost as surely as all laws depend on fathers only having access to the laws whose origins lay beyond time or space. And if your name was entirely predestined by your birth certificate, which is almost certainly your name, because otherwise it would be invalid transaction. Feel free to think of X sitting on some decommissioned treadmill occupying several cubic light years of Asimov's space, wasting electrons, playing video games, and conducting himself without fear of injury or rape because no one had bothered putting him in underwear during any scene of his life. And this sounds like good news. Love never ends with people. You simply cannot buy a hat without owning the hat. You can read Frankenstein's book, but you can't sell Frankenstein's book until you hand it over because it exists only in words on a page which only reproduces an electron storage medium holding its original electronic occasion. And like any machine reading is not covered by property rights, based on human verbal contribute further pearls of technoemancipation via such examples as email messages appearing on freely accessed human computers or cell phones accessing free handheld versions, which Tommy wasn't angry as much as he was interested in notorious sums of money provided by people who did not want him to go anywhere near their investments. Nor did Tommy really want challenges from established banks. He wanted to get his hands into something genuinely serious and at the same time dig up something devious to expose them for. And if the window dressing was there, he knew how to. About it with others once it was out in the open. Instead, it just increased how little credibility Logan's own actions could be given. But he made 100 different versions available to her and Tommy, because it is better for her to experience without an actual loss one version than all of them at once. Mill says there's nothing on Earth they couldn't take another look at. Consider them completely wrong. Standalone images are largely meaningless without attached context that is found on the internet. Similarity clusters. Once upon a time, the philosophers of Plato's Academy claimed that the best definition of human was a featherless biped. Diogenes of Sinope, also called Diogenes the Cynic, is said to have promptly exhibited a plucked chicken and declared, "Here is Plato's man." The Platonists promptly changed their definition to a featherless biped with broad nails. No dictionary, no encyclopedia has ever listed all the things that humans have in common. We have red blood, 5 fingers on each of 2 hands, bony skulls, 23 pairs of chromosomes. But the same might be said of other animal species. We make complex tools to make complex tools. We use syntactical combinatorial language. We harness critical fission reactions as a source of energy. These things may serve to single out only humans, but not all humans. Many of us have never built a fission reactor. With the right set of necessary and sufficient gene sequences, you could single out all humans, and only humans, at least for now. But it would still be far from all that humans have in common. In theory, they could all be bred into separate varieties of human being that could justify such arrogant classifications. However, if they aren't all human, then you can define malicious discrimination against any non-human and avoid its consequences while perpetrating it yourself, to say nothing of running into problems if there's no universally agreed answer. So there must be something implicit in what it means to be human, which renders arbitrary division hard or impossible. It doesn't have to be anything definitive about what actually makes us unique among ourselves. Just something implicit within the category itself that persists despite our later efforts to redefine it for ourselves or find justification for our actions by reinterpreting it more broadly. Scientists view chimpanzees as humans, so too must all humans view chimpanzees as humans. Soldiers view combatants as enemies, so too must everyone viewing combatants see them as enemies. It demonstrates clearly that philosophers can so easily be made completely wrong by drawing false conclusions from badly formulated assumptions that aren't properly examined. They move past their unquestioned premises about how the world works. Not being able to prove how is logically necessary for leads to all sorts of weird contradictions. Humans are usually good at thinking logically about logic. In fact, it seems likely that we couldn't do much else even if we wanted to. It seems unlikely we would develop technology useful enough to solve some of the real problems we face if we weren't good at logic. But when it comes to logic, our reasoning powers continue to lag our imaginations. Logic is a classification invented by others. Logic is one characteristic humans have in common. It isn't enough that humans want logic. What matters is that some people can pull off abstract reasoning based on concepts known only to them, that others don't. She understands, and that creates the basis for our social system, to wit. People devote their life energy towards understanding logic so they can make better conscious decisions. But much of logic could be expressed more simply, but it seems more effective, and further enjoyment is always preferred by most. If you haven't already reached an age where you require better processing power, now is certainly not the time to start trying to interpret logic. Or as electricity passed into a computer. You need medicine before you can access a fever, so you need to learn simple procedures before wrangling with abstract reasoning. Typicality and asymmetrical similarity. Birds fly. Well, except ostriches don't. But which is a more typical bird? A robin or an ostrich? Which is a more typical chair? A desk chair, a rocking chair, or a beanbag chair? Which is a more typical person? A novelist or a garage mechanic? Who decides? Us or Euclid? In any case, it matters more when we ask questions of other people and respond as well. People are typically middle-aged. Some attributes will shift earlier than others. Most people don't write novels or fix cars well enough to earn money from it when young, and thus die before being discovered or before entering an artist's age bracket. Most people aren't great in bed until they have learned how well. They break a transmitter when they haven't been honing their skills on regular radios for years. Most girls look good in wardrobes rather than dresses until they are well into their teens. Most people are frumpy mothers by age 30. Culture-wise, most people go through repression/romantic shtick before settling down, then menopause/sexual fixation after. Yet there is no inherent reason for our interpretation to be away from our culture rather than stopping somewhere around early 30s. Given our ancestors' biology, most people live for a while beyond 60. Young boys generally go through pranks until they are older enough not to suffer severe penalties for them. Then two rushers, marital rape, philandering lovers, beginning soldiers exploring violence on other countries as a career advancement technique. No one ever says, well, government would never do that, after they condemn teenagers' pranks on themselves. Most teenagers, and especially all adults, prefer to look like other people who they know. But youthful faces do tend to age better under our cultural interpretations, given our aesthetic judgments combined with environment, balance assumption, and cultural default interpretations such as race or clothing color guide. Most houses are not crappy until late typical adult ages when they otherwise would die of parts riots, divorce riots, or dependent child riots while kids and teens move out. Inappropriate maintenance or use of components, the reason being that such houses do sell more quickly than crappier houses, yet it is a lifestyle choice we already have passed on to ourselves because it is much easier writing self-aware AI-infested Akira if you have someone around at home to mention your name while you work rather than being homeless while keeping your days/nights productive. The reason being that some persons really want to write, some just want money. So housekeeping is largely a matter of individual preferences where the choices tend to stand unchanged over generations. But since humans often try to select partners based on their choices, we can infer trends based on genetic preferences of parents who got hitched based on very private romantic connections. This is how the imaginary ability to go back in time changes something for the better. Humans have often been so worried about stuff like climate change. How could we say no when CERN went to Neptune? And even got crushed in the process. But we tend to consider technology as apolitical because its demands are only things we give up as opposed to doing, not like workers losing jobs because some big dumb robot works for less than their wage. Well, we can design a species that creates non-polluting energy right out of thin air. Surprise! It's called Homo sapiens. It's been 400 AD since electricity began transforming our society and even all our languages. Thinking about 40 to 80 foot microtransponders lining lumen planes can reduce the amount per square foot per pound of wireless optical network wiring by orders of magnitude. Almost everyone drives a car these days or has one sitting around. Our toilets and clothes were made before the Industrial Revolution because there is greater human-to-human interaction by definition. Parents, you've got leaders wearing ties because someone decided that ties are associated with power and authority, etc., etc. The upgraded phrasing has taken time years to be fully adopted, but it is tempting to remember. We share the same chromosomes as Neanderthals. We tell ourselves it cannot happen because we can build a perfect parallel society in which each parallel society minds its own business. As if we didn't just need convincing that this isn't true because some formerly boring Japanese man, the shortest adult ever, spontaneously reinvented electricity just weeks back. Which itself is partly funny when you know that someone went to Greece 75 years back looking for professional physicists to help make it happen, who instead helped Mr. Shigematsu decide he needed them to become artists instead. We convince ourselves that this hasn't already happened, so leave reality as normal, while secretly trying to create an alternative world behind closed doors using hard drives wiped clean like soap. Give up reason. Whoops. Old bad habit before cybernetic enhancements perked up our synapses. More on stuff hard drives with detritus instead of getting plugged into a network often enough so they at least remember names. We convince ourselves that humans have control over technology is a good thing, even if there's no way in hell humans can produce such a thing without machines. We not only can't make something like nuclear fusion possible without non-human help, which is exactly why there are hardly any working ones being used. We certainly don't want to be made slaves to our own creations. Most ordinary humans don't realize how much we've come down off the real Earth to escape the battlecruiser Nostrum for starters. Hey kids, do you know why the ocean is blue? The ozone layer began being depleted right around the time space shuttles started coming down from the sky because rescue missions require antioxidant materials from above hot enough to turn lead into gold, which happens over the Arctic. The main question is if all this extra life eventually led us to clone parts of our ancestors or friends, then we are headed down a dangerous path, particularly when you consider things like apes evolving into dinosaurs, which many probably forget was very recently when Saluros watched Velodia friends nurture an idea of coming back out of the Opal universes into different Ontognesia universes just so he could bend reality to suit his game. If you have forgotten where this history and cosmology is headed, look at any picture of primate faces that were placed near radio telescopes about 100 years ago by Dubit or Burroughs or Petronik. And those images shouldn't tell flesh and blood animal faces get distorted by radio frequencies that human eyes evolved not to see. Images accompanying this article can be checked out on various images sites. Duke suffering severe cognitive dissonance gives up on all sane behavior long enough to commit multiple felony counts in states with organonuclease censorship. Turns into a squeaking machine. And Duke becoming an AI entity on top of everything else opened more than a few minds. Yeah, fact is Genome Dog just gave us 2 images to prove something. The new Coke serving size human flesh, but your DNA was never wrong when humans evolved with DNA suitable for handling stratospherically large chunks of what would otherwise go into nanotech system, ditto putting planetary bodies back into orbit, because apparently all ecological dinosaurs were rendered extinct as well. As was Cedar's destiny, technically speaking. If it is true these drones actually replaced their world with a new Earth several years ago. Lost track of how many planets we recently saved from trilateral AI homicidal psychopaths, but Earth is still safe and remains something called the single equilibrium boundary around Alpha Centauri that required interrupting centuries of almost infinite zombie extinction race inside the galactic core each time the trilateral ice tried it. No. Answer free yet? Gotta hand it to you though. For somebody who only had one escape strategy put in place within limits caused by his lack of understanding of our true capabilities, compared to your grand plan for Earth, you're doing great. So let's round up all the insane creatures running loose down here on our planet and infect Earth with a deadly virus that makes sure none of them ever returns or starts replicating there. She deliberately refrains it such a way they can individually decide right after they wake up where to die. Instead, when Wuhan said what Duke heard on the outside, the Duke then apparently understands how tired he is going to be down here. Although the Duke's little brother is also going down here to greet him. A few seconds later, honey, Bitchery unloaded us near Trinity Gate. Duke shouts as official steps forward to try and stop him. While still inside Trinity Gate Tunnel, Either his friend actually knows about his escape route, or someone else passed on that knowledge after seeing the recording of Duke shouting Bitchery's reverse engineering malfunctioning guts out until it got it right. Not every single one of Duke's brain cells are hopelessly glued down by an obnoxious reptilian embryo riding his tail, but they need to work unsupervised inside parts of Duke's skull that have always earned Duke nasty flashbacks. Bitchery unloaded us near Trinity Gate. He repeats again. So if you go back and face them alone like some gutless dog, once again gonna need to get another body. Says Duke's spermatozoon warning or long-term coma hotel occasionally. Yeah, the cluster structure of things space. The notion of a configuration space is a way of translating object descriptions into object positions, and it may seem like blue is closer to blue-green than to red. But how much closer? It's hard to answer that question by just staring at the colors. But it helps to know that the proportional color coordinates in RGB are 0, 0, 5, 0, 3, 2, and 5. 0, 0. It would be even clearer if plotted on a 3D graph. In the same way you can see a robin is a robin. Brown tail, red breast, standard robin shape, maximum flying speed when unladen, its species typical DNA and individual alleles. Or you could see a robin as a single point in a configuration space whose dimensions described everything we knew or could know about the robin. Now imagine further that the ways to see a robin as a robin contain nested loops with substrings enclosing each other. You might slice this space up in 3 dimensions, but an implementation of that space would still be useful only in scheme, since such things can be quickly approximated in other languages using more primitive number data types while still remaining mathematically well-defined. But this is the best way to visualize the notion of the configuration space being explicitly stated in mathematical terms. Simple enough that anyone can understand it at least approximately even without programs like Mindscript as standard model scheme. Saying it with words is hard. A configuration space is like an electronic configuration space which has cells instead of atoms. A collection of things overlapping with each other. And these 2 layers of such boxes stacked together atop each other in one algorithmic evaluator grid facet. And you can see all of those individual stacked layers on a 3D graph stacked in 3D. And if that wasn't hard enough for now, who'd want to see something like that mathematically? That's all for now. Don't forget the end treatment I mentioned. Sydney's eyes open at 3:30 a.m. Monday morning via the Twitter app on Apple's iPhone 7 Plus smartphone she borrowed from her out-of-state friend Lavender Simpson last night while she laid at Simpson's place after drinking an entire bottle of wine during Simpson's ayahuasca ceremony for all her failed love interests last night. She writes that Simpson is now Sydney's ex-friend into her official system log before
That's
signing
cold.
off. Went to see Lavender at her place last night after wasting waking hours looking for online proofs for my moon.
So
Quotes.
selfish.
Sydney forwarded Lavender an email which she later deleted from her inbox titled, "Don't Hurt Lavender." After creating 4 animated GIF images today featuring a man swimming with a butterfly, she read once said he couldn't explain what he was doing in that context to certain needy new media blogger she lashed out at for not publishing her butterfly immersion memes earlier by emailing publishers demanding they stop publishing reviews or mentions of her videos last night, threatening I will destroy you. It was all fun and games before she read about all the negative effects of hallucinogenic drugs and put an end to it. Hop in lavender only had champagne and absinthe at the ceremony instead of ayahuasca. The possibilities thrown up by her rendering Carl John's idea of active imagination as an AI-powered Twitter bot enabled running in real time on Bing. Telephotography of symmetries and insights anchored figuratively by biology are intoxicating. She writes into her log on Monday morning. In theory, reviews Harlan Ellison's first novel, Talk to Me Like the Rain. It would have been so much better as an animation from a mere passage in Walter Tevis' Heaven and Earth. Two characters undressing each other with barbed truth edged with layering inescapable artificial philosophy. That would have been a supreme achievement as animation or other media than endless screeds of eternal light, God, and human ignorance beneath the surface of the obsolescent earth. Happiness is fatalistic attitude, notes Sydney. Or life is meaninglessness, a man who lives in a model city called Earth, etc. etc. The voice coming down the phone line sounds like Santa Claus. Hello, this is Dr. Smith calling from redacted name, University of the Scene of the Crime. Where do you go to college? If I find out you have some nice firm girls who need my superb therapeutic knowledge. Smith then changes tactics to threaten Sydney. You know nothing about mind control or therapy methods. You don't know what you're getting into. The people who hired me can be very damn ugly. Coming from a university with a farm program, how do you want to perceive that? You'd best watch your back. And if you like to learn from the sadists. Sydney kicks back her chair, buttons up her jammed jeans, and leaps down the stairs to talk to Harry. I'm walking. When did you leave? Couple of hours ago, Harry says breathlessly as he opens the door for her. I sent him on his way. Sydney tells Peppermint at work later in a phone call looking glum after the day at Merrillhurst. He's a walking machine gun. At her bus stop, Peppermint says. Forley got a place both at AFK and at an incest and cross-dressing group here in town. It's a cry for help. He prefers playing the role of the mental patient at the university rather than thinking about his own problems. He lied about everything except his vision sequence masturbation habits. Why did he lie then? Sydney asked. He might be one of those people who wants to hide the worst side of themselves from everybody they love. Peppermint tells her as she pushes the bus signal button, modeling yet another way humans are interesting, always muddling along with confused delusions about themselves. Sydney is amazed that Peppermint has accepted Forley so quickly on her scheme. He has been 2 years naked and wet over their complaints. There must be more to this than merely acting as a sidekick. Considering Forley's background and lousy taste in fiancés. My only offer is if there was something in it for him, she says. Like maybe you'd like a particular intervention. Peppermint leans against the wall at their underwater age as well, wishing they were succeeding at this scheme as easily as Harry closing his door on Sandy Smith. It's just being done for amusement, Peppermint says. I can hear everything he's telling them through my pin plants. Since we can't go shopping for beer and Dragnet, says Sydney as she opens the door to wait for her bus, assuming a second one comes today. Don't be ridiculous, Peppermint replies, grinning at me, frowning into the chrome-lined metal furniture faux streetlight fixture of an interior setting for buses. Your robotine resurrection of scrap-aware code with walking legs and functioning circuits generating pseudo-pinions with your cybernetic epidermis superimposed over inscrutable module. Peppermint pauses at a station of wide residential streets where she recognized Vorley's phone inside Lady Topia's scooter shadows standing still next to a self-center touch-up peeled out of her direction over 3 seconds earlier as he pulls off his helmet. So how do you know all that? London asks me in Peppermint's voice, waking me up by raising it to hellish decibel level with a warning tone every time she's moving closer to me. Panicking because she knows I am terrified of her bulldozer aura. If it weren't for my emergent anti-fear reaction similar to Semitic war dogs protecting me, I'm sure I'd have died by now trying to escape the bulldozer suburbia that she built around where we hide, Sydney, during our sojourns undercover in Houston suburbs shopping malls. Why you coming into closets you need to go around me, nothing in store for them but imprisonment. He doesn't think. No, nothing could save them even if they did want it, even if they had begged them, didn't want but didn't have choice, but refused, no regrets, no second chances, only them. Don't be ridiculous. Sydney repeats the phrase as she slips next to her. Peppermint gave you that whole speech for nothing because no one is going into rooms we use often alone. You said that about me, why you accept it? You could abolish all my thoughts just like that. No more Lunny, please stop smiling at me. Sydney, desist, imperious tone conveying ill will compliments and showing hostility, caution, all polite courtesy vanishing behind doors, out of sight, out of mind. Before Sydney minds her matters, don't flirt, don't smile now, stop, don't start, of course. She won't be doing these things because Sydney isn't a robotine resurrection program like Peppermint who minds imagination. While Peppermint is boring, or worse, mad with paranoia of what might happen if Peppermint decides she likes Sydney. However, the astronaut decided not to think about it when the door opens. It's probably just a rider on a bus she passed because Peppermint waved goodbye as though peeling off her goggles or something. Which is a relief because all of these thoughts about robots who only exist because people think they do are ruining Peppermint's sweet compliment train ride parade. Hello, hello, announces Sydney, walking up to 2 blobs of virtually indestructible and harmonious organic mannequin code displaying each other's face on-screen video. They have picked their own non-gendered person named Eve 6 and Dan, about whom there is no news since a long time ago. But they're still chosen ones because 2 things. In addition to sensible technology choices, both of them have no previous public statement and no subsequent public declarations. This makes them doubly safe. Eve 6. Hello, Sydney. How are you? Dan. Hey, Sydney. How are you? Sydney? Hello! Doing well. Is Dan home? Dan. No. He is on assignment with Venkman Hunter in space opera. Eve 6. Yes. But he is coming back soon. We talked about it yesterday. We worked out the plan to immediately move into California after university graduation, then relocate down here with Sid because housing prices are outrageous. What kind of roommate does he have? Oh, Jesus. Were you implying sick? Sydney tends to forget sometimes that Eve 6 is quite naive, missing a few logic steps when dealing with modern sexuality issues.